All right. So we talked about Humane a couple weeks ago, right? Which was, I think, the first one of these like AI native devices. And the idea was to supplement, but actually eventually, I think, replace the phone, and did a bunch of like interesting stuff. It has a camera on it. It can listen to you. It can talk to you. It's a voice interface, etc. And I think one of the big things was what we really want is a really good Siri, right? A Siri that like knows how to do things and can actually take actions across a variety of different apps based on the things that I'm asking it to do. And what I found compelling and interesting about this product is that's a big piece of the vision. Is like, hey, we want to build a device that doesn't have an app structure. It has voice as the native interface for how it works, AI at the core, and can do a variety of different actions. And I thought that this was a step closer to that than Humane was. Now, it's still a different device, which I think is interesting, but I thought they did some cool stuff with it, like using the camera to be able to look at different applications. They have a web portal so you can connect things to it and actually take actions and different things. So I just thought it was like, how many of these are we going to see? And do we know what the right answer is? And then the last bit is it's cheap as heck, like $199 one time. I have no idea if this device is profitable for them or how they plan on making money, but I think it has a lot better chance of being successful at that price point. Like, I'm going to buy this thing. It's just cheap. It's fun. Yeah, but it feels like
it's cheap, it's fun, but are you going to carry it around in addition to your phone? And why?
I will only carry it around if it's like really useful, right?
I think this is the first piece of tech since maybe ChatGPT that thought about AI and LLMs, or, this world.
Large action models.
outside of the constraints that we currently have. He doesn't want to just make the phones or the computer better, right? He wants to think about a world where the idea of flipping between apps doesn't exist.
I thought that was the most interesting piece, right? From like a product strategy perspective, if you're going to go up against an incumbent, you basically want to do something that they are unlikely to do because it completely disrupts a huge part of their business. And of course, if you're going up against something like Apple and the iPhone and you're introducing a paradigm of no apps, it like completely F's a huge revenue stream, the highest margin revenue stream for Apple, which is like the percentage share that they take on applications. But the challenge I guess I see is like I still haven't seen anything in the video that isn't going to be super doable on the phone. And therefore, there's a question to me of like, why would I carry around a second device? And it's also not looking like this will completely replace the phone. So it lives in some weird middle of that. And so I guess like given the price point, my guess is it does like find a market. I'm still processing how this either replaces my device or supplements my device in a meaningful enough way that I will overcome the friction of not only carrying the thing around, but making the decision every time I want to go use it. Do I go use my phone or do I go use this like device?
Right.
In the beginning, I was like, oh, wow, like they're really attacking something that is going to be painful for the incumbent to change. And then the further I got along, I was like, I don't know, I lost a little bit of that excitement.
Yeah. I think your point about a no app world is differentiated enough that the existing players are very unlikely to do it, right? It would be bad for Apple, not just for business model reasons, but like the structure and organization of how the thing is built is around an app-based model, right? Like that is like foundational. In a lot of ways, it's sort of like the way iOS's app model was so different compared to like what Windows and desktop machines did. And when they tried to port the Windows paradigm of how multitasking and apps and all those sort of things and software being under your complete control onto the phone, like Apple did a very different thing, which was like closed garden, very limited number of apps, very limited set of functionality, and made it like a more elegant device, touch first, and it could be successful where other touch products hadn't been. I think like there's something interesting to this, which is like, hey, there are no apps, right? There's just, the way I think of it is it's almost like What they're trying to do is voice is at the center. There's a series of capabilities out there in the world, either through APIs, and they're hacking it by like automating and doing actions on top of existing interfaces, right? And as a result, it like completely takes the apps out of the picture. So it's actually bad for the apps too, right? Because my consumer relationship with Yelp no longer exists because it's being disintermediated by this like rabbit thing that's going and doing that for me. So I think it's kind of interesting in that respect. If I just look at it in my mind, like what does the future of this look like? Assuming LLMs can do anything in the world, take action, do some planning, be smart, etc. This is probably the kind of device that's successful, right? A very voice-first interface that can interact with the real world through a camera, voice, and some other interactions, and be able to take any kind of action and any kind of tool without you having to do it yourself, right? The question is whether like there's a group of people who care about that enough to carry a second device to do it.
Yeah.
And it's almost like when Palm Pilots first came out, like there were a set of people who had a phone in one pocket and a Palm Pilot in the other, and eventually it merged together, right? And that's when the market exploded. So is this an early adopter thing? I think it's like ultra nerds who really want to do this.
Google Glass, the Google Glass audience. Yeah.
Yeah. The Google Glass audience.
I think kind of talking through this more, I actually, besides the app thing, I think maybe if it actually works as they are showing it, the most powerful thing here is probably this large action model. So yeah, I think the big problem with anything that's kind of agent related or the actions that they're describing here is this whole concept of a compounding error rate, which is that all of these requests actually require a bunch of intermediate steps between the request and the action. And every single one of those steps introduces the possibility for an error. And if that error rate, even if it's small, a few percent across 6, 7, 8, 9 intermediate steps really freaking adds up. And as a result, you basically end up with an experience that just inconsistently delivers. And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, it sounds like they basically build a custom model in order to handle this. And there's others in the space that have raised like $500 million to do like something similar. They're not even close to where this is claiming to be at the moment. If it works as intended, that's like fucking crazy that they've made that advancement.
Here's an analogy for this. This thing feels like a remote control for all the other devices and apps and things that you have in the world. And the reason I think of this is we just bought a new TV. And it drives me nuts that I can't just say to it, like, put the Michigan game on from YouTube TV, right? Like, for whatever reason, that's not the primary interface. And this thing almost seems like it's trying to head in that direction. It's like, hey, we can make a generalized remote control that can take action in a variety of different apps, learn certain multi-step processes. You can train it. It has a camera so it can, see things and interact in the world and be like almost like a glass, but without being strapped to your face, and take those actions and is a meta remote control for everything, including your phone, your desktop app, your email, etc. I think that's kind of cool. Does it work or not? And does it replace your phone eventually? Probably. But I think the problem with replacing the phone right now is that it has to be able to do everything your phone does, and this thing can't scroll Instagram yet. So like, what if we do just the remote control thing and go from there? So maybe I could post to Instagram from this because I'm like, take this photo, make me look good, put it in a, snowy background and post it to Instagram. Maybe it can do that kind of action, but by interacting with my phone or with other apps or with desktop, with the portal and the connections that I make with it to do that. It's kind of a cool way of thinking about it, I think.
Do you think the concept humans interacting with apps is an inevitable part of our future, or do you see a path to moving away from that?
Okay, so like,
I think they stay.
Really works. Really? Okay.
We are visual human beings. That is what we respond to, right? So this idea that we're going to process all of our interactions through some text-based prompt is like, I honestly just like think is blasphemy. Like, right? Like,
yeah. So I agree with you on that like touching, tapping, and seeing visual things is a really high bandwidth way to communicate and interact with things. Voice is good for certain things. It's not great for everything, right? I do not want to say, turn up the volume 4%. That's silly. Let me press a button 3 times, 4 times to turn up the volume. But split screen the Michigan game on the left and, Arrested Development on the right or something like that. Maybe because that takes multiple actions. It's the planning piece that's interesting, that voice can take what is a simple thing for a human to comprehend and turn it into a series of actions. I actually think that apps may not be the interaction, but there will be visual interaction. So like, if you imagine a world where I can give complex input through text or other types of things, video, interactions, etc., and then it's going to go do something for me, right? Show me all the restaurants that are within a 5-mile radius that are taking reservations today. This is like a very simple thing that's actually like kind of hard to do right now. I do see a world where like I get a visual response to that, not a voice response, that is laid out and visually looks good and is well designed, and that I click on the one I actually want the 7 p.m. reservation on. But that's not exactly an app, right? It's sort of like, imagine the apps are APIs or information that LLMs
They're
or
summarizing
other types of
the
models
app
can
world.
interact with, summarize, and then build custom UI for me that actually is for that specific interaction. So almost think of it as like, we're writing the hyper customized software for every single thing that you ever ask for. I think there is some future where that is the model. And
that was
apps
Gemini's.
are really like
that was Gemini's
systems.
hypothesis, right? It was that they basically custom built the UI for the request to serve the intent of the request, which I think is interesting.
Exactly.
Is definitely interesting.
Yeah.
Like there could be a world in which like it knows so well what things I like to look at on Instagram and Threads and X and all these sort of things, and what things I like to like on those platforms, that it basically does the scrolling through feeds for me and shows me the stuff that it thinks A, I will like, or B, I will heart or comment on, or whatever it is, right? Do you think the reason it's so cheap is that they just want mass adoption and they want to basically get as much data as possible, and then the price is going to get jacked up in V2 or whatever it is?
I imagine the hardware itself can't possibly be that expensive if they're going to charge $199 for it. Right? I don't know what's in that thing, but my suspicion is most of it is offloaded somewhere else in the cloud. And that's why they can sell a cheap device. I might be wrong about that. I have no idea. And my suspicion is they have some idea about how high adoption gives them some network advantage that they can then monetize in some other way. I don't know what that looks like.
I do think I'm reading this TechCrunch article in one of the first quotes, which I think helps distinguish this conversation, is that he says the phone is an entertainment device, but if you're trying to get something done, it's not the highest efficient way. So I think where they're trying to position is a utility device versus an entertainment device. So it's interesting to think about whether I agree with that positioning or not.
That the phone is an entertainment device?
Yeah. And that it doesn't also encompass utility. I think the problem is that entertainment is just more addicting. It's a more frequent habit. So if you own that habit, it's also,
then you own all the other habits.
It's also easy to own the utility functions as well. So yeah. I think people would prefer this to be a default app like the OS. Actually, maybe the play here is actually what they're really developing is the OS, the software, this action model, all that kind of stuff. And the device is just like, the only way you build a new OS is if you also build a device right now. And maybe this is just positioned for Google or Apple to like scoop up.
Or you just need lots of human feedback and lots of interaction. So what's the best way to get the best possible action model in the world? Well, get a lot of people trying to take actions. What was it? Nabil said something like, there's 1 million early adopters in AI who will try anything you put out there. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe that's what they're counting on, is that there's 1 million early adopters who will pay $100 for this thing. They probably will. I mean, I already said I would buy it. It's $199?
Yeah. So if you're in Vegas and you have to put your chips on either Humane or Rabbit, where are you betting?
Well, Rabbit, as in like the potential like value creation, and like, if we were just to measure on like what the value of this company or liquidity is, I think the device is the least valuable part of this whole thing. Maybe this initial device is just proving out the concept and the software and everything underneath the hood, and they want to license the software out in some way to other device makers, right? Because you could imagine the same software working on almost any piece of hardware, even stuff like in your kitchen,
Yeah.
right? To
Right.
control appliances and stuff.
Okay. That is a good insight. Assuming that's the play, my bet is on this, right? Like, because this kind of interaction embedded into all kinds of stuff or just ambiently around me is pretty cool. Versus, I think the humane bet, which is like, I've got a little companion that I interact with and like intermediates the world for me, and it's really hardware focused. I don't know if that's going to be the wide adoption thing.
Sorry, I'm in the middle of ordering the device.
Okay. I have one other snarky-ish comment on this. Can everybody who builds these things, please, for the love of God, stop trying to emulate Steve Jobs? Like, down to the black t-shirt / turtleneck, the hands, the style of delivery.
One more
slides,
thing at the end. Yeah.
One more thing. And now we're going to talk about price. Like, come on. If you want to be the next Steve Jobs, like, you have to be a different person. Go out and do your own thing. Don't copy his thing.